Sitting across from me was Damon Blackwood, my biggest rival and, unfortunately, the most stubborn man I had ever met. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who could make an entire room fall silent with a single glance was currently sitting on my couch, completely focused on a steaming bowl of noodles. Damon was 6 weeks pregnant with my daughter. And judging by the way he was eating, you'd think he hadn't had a proper meal in months. I watched him shovel down noodles with an almost frightening determination. The funny part? His last meal had been only 2 hours ago. And it hadn't been some tiny snack, either. He'd eaten 2 whole burgers. 2. I leaned back against the couch, staring at him as he continued eating as though those burgers had never existed. I'd always assumed pregnancy came with its share of difficulties for everyone. Morning sickness. Exhaustion. Loss of appetite. Apparently, none of those rules applied to Damon Blackwood. My huge, dominant alpha rival was carrying my daughter, and somehow, the only problem pregnancy had given him so far was an appetite that seemed capable of swallowing an entire restaurant. I couldn't help it. A small smile appeared on my lips. Damon immediately noticed. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Why are you smirking?" I quickly straightened my expression. "I'm not." "You are." "I was just looking at you." His eyes narrowed. "Then why are you smiling?" I sighed. "I wasn't laughing at you." "You were." "I wasn't, Damon." He stared at me for another moment before his expression hardened. "Are you mocking me for eating?" My eyes widened. "What? No. You're laughing at me." "I swear I'm not. I was just admiring you." That only made him look more suspicious. "Admiring me?" "Yes." "How?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. How was I supposed to explain that I found it strangely adorable watching the man who had spent years trying to crush me in business sitting there eating noodles like his entire survival depended on them? "Never mind," I muttered. Apparently, that was the wrong answer. Damon suddenly dropped his fork into the bowl. "I won't eat anymore." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Damon, you clearly think I'm eating too much." "I never said that." "You didn't have to." He pushed the bowl away and folded his arms. I immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry," I said, getting to my feet. "I really am. I wasn't mocking you. I was just admiring you, that's all." Damon turned his face away. He wasn't listening. I took a step toward him, intending to sit beside him and convince him to finish his food. I didn't even make it that far. One of his bodyguards stepped in front of me. I stopped. Slowly, I looked at him. The bodyguard remained completely expressionless. Behind him, Damon sat with his arms crossed, looking like I had personally committed the greatest betrayal of his life. I let out a long, exhausted breath. Then I turned around and dropped back onto the couch. I still couldn't believe it. Damon Blackwood. My enormous, terrifying rival. The man I had once considered impossible to intimidate. And now I had to practically fuss over him because he was 6 weeks pregnant with my daughter. I glanced at him again. He was still sulking. I rubbed my forehead. This man is going to drive me insane before the baby is even born. If I traced everything back to the beginning, it started with something I had wanted for years. An heir. Not just any heir. I wanted the strongest Enigma heir possible. I was an Enigma myself, and I had always known how rare my designation was. My strength, my instincts, my abilities, everything I had been born with set me apart. And I wanted my child to be even greater. I wanted an heir who could surpass me one day. Someone who could inherit my strength and take it further than I ever could. That was why I began privately searching for the perfect alpha. A pure alpha. Someone with an exceptional bloodline, powerful genetics, and a body capable of carrying my child. I kept the search completely secret. No family. No friends. No one knew. At the time, I thought I was simply looking for the perfect person to carry my heir. I never imagined that person would be Damon Blackwood. My greatest rival. And the man I'd secretly carried feelings for long before I was willing to admit them. Damon and I had met years ago at the same elite boarding school in Switzerland. He was 3 years younger than me, but somehow, he had caught my attention almost immediately. He was arrogant, stubborn, sharp-tongued, and completely infuriating. Yet I couldn't stop noticing him. I watched him from a distance more often than I should have. And whenever someone tried to cause him trouble, I quietly stepped in. I protected him whenever I could, but I never let him know. Our families had been rivals for generations. The Blackwoods and my family were constantly fighting over influence and business, so openly caring about Damon was never an option. Besides, Damon himself seemed determined to make me hate him. He had been mean to me from the beginning. Always challenging me. Always provoking me. Always finding some new way to get under my skin. And somehow, the more he irritated me, the more attracted I became to him. It was through those feelings that I eventually understood something about myself. I'd never really questioned my sexuality before. I'd simply never felt strongly enough about anyone to question it. Then Damon came along. And suddenly, I understood. I was attracted to men. I was attracted to him. Unfortunately, growing older didn't make those feelings disappear. Instead, when we both entered the business world, our family's rivalry became ours. Damon and I became the biggest competitors in our industry. Every deal became a battle. Every acquisition became a challenge. Neither of us could stand the thought of losing to the other. And I'll admit something. I loved winning. But what I loved even more was watching Damon lose. That tiny flash of frustration in his eyes. The way his jaw tightened. The glare he'd give me afterward, as though he were silently promising to destroy me the next time. I pushed myself harder just to see that expression. Then 3 months ago, the Blackwood family suffered a devastating loss. They had lost a major deal, and the consequences had been brutal. Their business value began to fall, investors became nervous, and the family's position in the industry was suddenly at risk. Then an opportunity appeared. A massive contract had entered the market, one that could practically save the Blackwood family. And I was their only real competitor. I knew Damon would come to me. I'd already made my decision long before he stepped into my office. So when he finally stood in front of my desk and asked me to let him have the contract, I simply looked at him and said, "Fine. You can have it." Damon stared at me. "You're agreeing that easily?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't need the contract." That wasn't entirely true. I wanted it. But I had already decided that Damon could have it. His expression remained suspicious. "I don't want you to give it to me for free. You don't owe me anything. I said I'll give you something in return." "Damon. I mean it." I watched him carefully. He was too proud to accept something without paying for it, especially from me. "I'll do anything you want," he said. Those words made me pause. Anything. I could have asked for money. Shares. A business partnership. Anything that would benefit me. But none of those things mattered. There was only one thing I had wanted for a long time. I want an heir. Damon frowned. "What?" "I want a child." He stared at me as though he hadn't expected that answer. I continued before he could misunderstand. "I've been searching privately for a pure alpha who can carry my child. I want an heir stronger than me. I'm an enigma, Damon. I want my child to inherit my strength and eventually surpass me." His expression slowly changed. "You're serious?" "Yes." "You've actually been looking for someone to carry your child?" "Yes." "And that's all you want?" I nodded. "If you can give me that, then I'll consider us even. But if you can't, you can still have the contract." Damon's eyes narrowed. "You'd give me the contract anyway?" "Yes." "Even if I say no?" "Yes." That seemed to confuse him more than anything else. "Then why are you asking me?" "Because you said you'd give me anything." He stared at me for a long moment. Then his expression hardened. "You really are unbelievable." I said nothing. "You're searching for some perfect alpha just to produce an heir?" "I want a child." "For what? To continue your bloodline? To prove you can create someone stronger than yourself?" His voice became increasingly bitter. "You've reduced having a child to some kind of project. That's not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" "I already told you. You want an heir because you can't stand the idea of anyone being stronger than you. That's pathetic." The word hit me harder than I expected. My jaw tightened. For a moment, I wanted to lash out at him. But I held myself back. Damon looked away, still angry. I took a breath before speaking again. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." "I don't want a child because of my company. I don't want one because of my name. And I don't want one just to prove something." I looked directly at him. "I want a child because I genuinely want one." He went quiet. "I want to have someone of my own. Someone I can love. Someone I can protect. Someone I can watch grow up." My voice softened. "The heir isn't a business strategy, Damon. I want that child with my whole heart." He stared at me. Then, after a long silence, he asked, "Then why don't you just marry someone and have that child?" I looked away. "Because I don't want to marry someone I don't love." Damon didn't respond. I slowly raised my eyes back to him. "And the person I love?" The words felt heavier than they should have. I swallowed. "The person I love would never marry me." Damon froze. I could see the surprise in his eyes, but I didn't explain further. I didn't have to. For years, I had carried that feeling quietly. I had loved someone I could never have. Someone who was standing right in front of me. Damon held my gaze for several seconds. Neither of us spoke. Then he suddenly turned away. "Forget it." He walked toward the door. "Damon." He didn't stop. The door slammed shut behind him. I remained standing in the middle of my office, staring at the closed door. I had already decided to give him the contract. I hadn't needed anything from him. But somehow, the moment he asked what I wanted, I'd finally said the one thing I'd been keeping buried for years. I wanted a child. And I wanted love. Unfortunately, the person I loved was the one person I had convinced myself would never choose me. After Damon walked out of my office, I didn't hear from him again. Not for a day. Not for a week. Not even for an entire month. There were no calls between us, no messages, and no unexpected encounters. I told myself the distance was probably for the best. Still, I couldn't completely stop thinking about him. Then, a month later, we found ourselves under the same roof again at one of the biggest business gatherings of the year. The ballroom was filled with powerful executives, investors, and representatives from some of the country's most influential families. And then I saw him. Damon Blackwood. He stood across the room, surrounded by people, looking as composed as ever. For a moment, our eyes met. Neither of us said anything. I looked away first. The award ceremony began soon afterward. One category after another was announced, until the host finally reached the night's biggest award. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for the Businessman of the Year award. The room quieted. I wasn't expecting anything. Then the host opened the envelope. And this year's Businessman of the Year is... There was a brief pause. Adrian Alexander. For a second, I didn't move. Then the ballroom erupted into applause. I stood and adjusted my jacket before making my way toward the stage. But halfway there, my eyes instinctively searched for Damon. I expected the familiar expression. That irritated look. That flash of jealousy he could never quite hide whenever I won. But this time, it wasn't there. Damon was simply looking at me. And then he smiled. Not sarcastically. Not mockingly. It was a genuine smile. Somehow, that affected me more than winning the award. After the ceremony, Damon approached me. Congratulations, Adrian. I looked at him. Thank you. He hesitated before adding quietly. And, thank you. For what? The contract. I knew exactly what he meant. You don't have to thank me. I do. His expression softened. You gave me that deal when you didn't have to. It saved my family's business. I nodded. I'm glad it helped. For a moment, we simply stood there. It was strange. For years, we'd barely been able to stand in the same room without turning everything into a competition. Yet now, neither of us seemed interested in fighting. Later that night, a group of us went out for drinks. Somehow, Damon and I ended up in the private section of the bar, away from the crowd and the noise. At first, we talked about harmless things. The award. Business. His family. Then the conversation slowly shifted. We talked about our school days in Switzerland. About how we'd spent years competing against each other. About things we'd never had the courage to say. The drinks made it easier to lower the walls between us. Before I realized it, Damon was sitting close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. I turned toward him. He was already looking at me. There was something unfamiliar in his eyes. Something vulnerable. Neither of us spoke. Then Damon leaned forward and kissed me. I froze for a heartbeat. Damon pulled back slightly, as though giving me the chance to stop him. I didn't. I reached for him and kissed him back. Years of rivalry seemed to disappear in that single moment. All those arguments. All those stolen glances. All the feelings I'd spent years hiding. They finally had nowhere left to hide. We kissed again, neither of us wanting to be the first to pull away. Eventually, we left the bar together and returned to my suite. That night, we stopped pretending there was nothing between us. We stayed together until morning, allowing ourselves to feel everything we'd spent years suppressing. For that one night, Damon wasn't my rival. And I wasn't his. We were simply Adrian and Damon. Two people who had finally stopped fighting what had been between them all along. The next morning, I woke to warmth. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then I felt an arm wrapped around me, and everything slowly came back. Damon Blackwood was sleeping in my arms. His head rested against my chest, his breathing soft and even. His scent filled the room, lingering in the sheets and surrounding us. We were both naked beneath the blanket. And then the memories came rushing back. The drinks. The private room. The way we'd looked at each other. That kiss. Everything we'd done after it. I couldn't stop staring at Damon. He looked completely different while sleeping. Without his usual arrogant expression or that sharp glare he always gave me, he almost looked peaceful. Beautiful. I found myself smiling. Before I could stop myself, I leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss against his forehead. A moment later, Damon stirred. His eyes slowly opened. For a few seconds, he simply stared at me. Then realization hit him. He immediately pulled away. The movement made the blanket slip away from me, exposing me completely. Damon's eyes widened, and he immediately shut them again. Adrian, you're a jerk. Get some clothes on. I blinked before looking down at myself. Then I looked back at him and couldn't help laughing. Why are you reacting like that? Because you're naked. Damon, you've already seen everything last night. His face reddened. That was in the dark. I smiled. So you didn't see anything? Not properly. I shook my head. You're just jealous because you don't have a body like mine. Damon's eyes flew open. He glared at me. Jealous? Obviously. He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he simply grabbed his clothes and started putting them on. I watched him with an amused smile. Once he was dressed, he turned toward me. About last night? His expression became serious. It was a mistake. My smile disappeared. Don't think it means anything more than that, he added. Whatever happened between us stays between us. I studied his face. Then I asked quietly, what if you get pregnant? Damon froze. Slowly, he turned to look at me. For a moment, he seemed genuinely stunned by the question. Then he scoffed. I don't think you have the capacity to make a dominant alpha like me pregnant after one night. I raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of confidence. It's the truth. And if you are? Damon stared at me for several seconds. Then I'll decide what to do when the time comes. He picked up his jacket. But I don't think that's going to happen. Then he walked toward the door. I watched him leave without saying another word. The door closed behind him. I sat there quietly for a moment before looking toward the window. The moon was still faintly visible in the morning sky. I clasped my hands together. Moon goddess. I couldn't help smiling. Please let him be pregnant. It sounded ridiculous. I'd spent months searching for the perfect alpha to carry my heir. And now, after one night with the man I'd secretly loved for years, I was sitting there praying that he was carrying my child. But then another thought crossed my mind. One I'd never allowed myself to seriously consider. What if this could become something more? I remembered Damon from the night before. The way he'd looked at me. The way he'd held me. The way he'd fallen asleep in my arms. And the way he'd stayed there until morning. Damon could call it a mistake all he wanted. But I had seen his eyes. I knew him too well. Someone like Damon wouldn't let himself become that vulnerable with a person he felt absolutely nothing for. There had to be something there. Even if it was only a tiny soft corner he hadn't admitted to himself yet. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine something I'd never dared to hope for. Maybe I could actually have Damon. Not as my rival. Not as the Blackwood heir. Not simply as the alpha who might carry my child. But as the man I loved. As my partner. The thought alone made a smile spread across my face. For the first time in years, I let myself hope. This version of the story has been adapted and edited to comply with YouTube's community guidelines. The full, uncensored audiobook is available exclusively on my Patreon. The Patreon link is in the description if you'd like to listen to the complete version. After that morning, I became hopelessly obsessed with one question. Was Damon pregnant? I tried to be patient. I really did. For about 2 days. Then I started texting him. Have you noticed anything yet? No reply. A few hours later, I tried again. Damon, you should probably take a test. Still nothing. By the end of the week, I had completely lost whatever little patience I had left. Are you pregnant? Damon? Just answer me. His response finally came. Stop bothering me, Adrian. I grinned at my phone. So you haven't checked? The message showed as delivered. Then nothing. I sent another one. It never went through. I stared at the screen. Damon had blocked me. I slowly lowered my phone. Okay, maybe I'd gone a little too far. Just a little. A month passed before I saw him again. One afternoon, while I was working in my office, my assistant announced that Damon Blackwood was there to see me. My heart immediately jumped. Send him in. The door opened. Damon stepped inside. But the moment I saw his face, my excitement disappeared. He looked unusually serious. He closed the door behind him and stood silently in front of my desk. What happened? I asked. He took a breath. I'm pregnant. Everything inside me stopped. For a second, I genuinely wondered if I'd heard him correctly. You're, what? Pregnant. My face broke into the biggest smile. I stood so quickly that my chair rolled backward. Before Damon could react, I crossed the room and pulled him into my arms. You're pregnant. Adrian. I knew it. Adrian. He pushed me away. I barely noticed. I was too happy. You're carrying my child. His expression remained serious. Listen to me. I finally calmed down. Damon looked directly at me. I'll carry the baby. I nodded. And I'll give you the heir you wanted? My heart squeezed. But don't misunderstand what this means. His voice became firm. I agreed to carry your child. That's all. I remained quiet. I'll give birth to the baby, and I'll raise my child myself. I'm not handing the baby over to you. I nodded immediately. Okay. Damon looked surprised. You're not going to argue? No. You're agreeing? I agreed the moment you told me you were pregnant. I stepped closer. As long as you're carrying my child, I'll respect whatever you want. His expression softened for the briefest moment. I smiled and pulled him into another hug. This time, he didn't push me away. He simply stood there in my arms, silent. After that, I made a decision Damon absolutely hated. I moved into his penthouse. You're not living here. I am. No. Yes. Adrian. Damon. He glared at me. I smiled. I need to take care of you. I don't need a babysitter. I know. Then move out. No. He stared at me for several seconds before finally rubbing his forehead. You're unbelievably stubborn. And you're pregnant. That isn't an argument. It is to me. Eventually, Damon gave up. So I stayed. From then on, I was there for everything. I made sure he ate properly. I accompanied him to his appointments. I kept track of his medications and doctor's instructions. Whenever he looked tired, I was immediately there. Whenever he complained, I listened. And whenever he told me he could handle something himself, I reminded him that he was carrying my child. He hated that argument. But he never asked me to leave again. Then came the appointment when Damon was 6 weeks pregnant. We sat together while the doctor examined him. I tried to remain calm, but I couldn't stop staring at the screen. Then the doctor smiled. Everything looks good. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. And congratulations, the doctor added. You're expecting a little girl. I froze. A girl? Damon looked toward the screen. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his expression softened. A daughter. The word came out quietly. I looked at him. His eyes were still fixed on the screen, but I could see the happiness he was trying to hide. I couldn't hide mine at all. A daughter. Our daughter. I'd spent months dreaming about the perfect heir. I'd imagined strength and power and a legacy that would outlive me. But none of those things mattered in that moment. All I could think about was the tiny girl growing inside Damon. My little girl. I reached for his hand. He glanced at me. Neither of us said anything. But his fingers slowly curled around mine. And that tiny gesture made me smile. For the first time, this no longer felt like a deal between rivals. It felt like the beginning of a family. And that's how I ended up in the strangest situation of my life, living with my greatest rival, taking care of him through his pregnancy, and slowly becoming far more attached to both Damon and the little girl growing inside him than I had ever expected. Damon's pregnancy itself was surprisingly easy. He didn't suffer from morning sickness or any serious complications. Physically, he handled everything almost effortlessly. Unfortunately for me, pregnancy seemed to bring out an entirely different side of him. Damon became sulky. Over the smallest things. If his breakfast wasn't exactly what he wanted, he'd cross his arms and refuse to eat. If I asked him to rest, he'd complain that I was treating him like he was helpless. And if I happened to disagree with him about something, he'd give me that cold silence that could last for hours. But Damon wasn't my only problem. He had 2 bodyguards who were apparently more protective of him than his own shadow. And then there were his maids. God, the maids. They were even more dramatic. The 4 of them had somehow formed an alliance against me. If Damon so much as frowned, they looked at me as though I'd committed a crime. If he complained about being uncomfortable, 3 people immediately appeared with pillows, blankets, water, snacks, and whatever else they thought he might need. And somehow, I was always the suspect. Mr. Adrian, you shouldn't let him stand for so long. Adrian, Damon needs to rest. Adrian, why hasn't he eaten yet? Adrian, he said he's uncomfortable. Sometimes I wondered if they had forgotten that Damon was a grown man. Apparently, in their eyes, I was the criminal responsible for every minor inconvenience in his pregnancy. The worst part? Damon encouraged them. He would sit there looking completely innocent while his bodyguards and maids fussed over him. And whenever I tried to take care of him myself, they watched me like supervisors inspecting an employee. Damon quickly discovered that if he complained about something, everyone would immediately jump into action. So naturally, he started taking advantage of it. Adrian, my back hurts. A pillow appeared behind him. Adrian, I'm thirsty. A maid brought him water. Adrian, I'm hungry. Someone was already preparing food. And if I tried to do any of it myself, Damon would simply sit there with that faintly smug expression while everyone encouraged me. Careful. Make sure he's comfortable. More pillows. Don't forget the blanket. Sometimes I couldn't believe it. I was an Enigma who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. I had faced some of the most powerful businessmen in the country. Yet somehow, I had become a full-time caretaker for one dramatic pregnant alpha. And Damon loved every second of it. The more I tried to pamper him, the more demanding he became. Still, I couldn't bring myself to complain too much. Because every time I saw him resting comfortably, one hand unconsciously resting over his growing belly, I remembered why I was doing all of this. Our daughter was growing inside him. And somewhere along the way, taking care of Damon had stopped feeling like an obligation. It had become something I genuinely wanted to do. Even if his ridiculous bodyguards and overly dramatic maids made sure I suffered for it. Looking back now, that's exactly how I fell into this situation. I had started with one simple dream, to have the strongest Enigma heir. Somehow, I ended up with Damon Blackwood carrying my daughter. And an entire household treating me like a criminal while I desperately tried to keep my spoiled, sulky rival happy. For a while, everything went almost perfectly. Damon's pregnancy continued smoothly, and as the weeks passed, his belly slowly began to grow. I noticed every little change. The first time his clothes started fitting differently. The way his hand would unconsciously rest over his stomach. The way he'd sometimes look down at his belly when he thought I wasn't watching. And every time I saw it, I felt something I couldn't put into words. Our daughter was growing inside him. Our daughter. Yet, as happy as I was about the baby, I wanted something more. I wanted Damon. I didn't want our relationship to end with a contract, a pregnancy, and a child between us. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted him to know that I hadn't fallen for him because he was carrying my heir. I'd loved him long before any of this happened. And after everything that had happened between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that Damon felt something for me too. There were moments when I caught him looking at me differently. Moments when he seemed to forget that we were supposed to be rivals. And I still remembered the way he'd held me that night. I couldn't believe that had meant absolutely nothing. So I decided that before our daughter was born, I would tell him everything. I wanted our little girl to come into this world with both her parents beside her, not because of an agreement, but because we'd chosen each other. But every time I tried to have that conversation, Damon found a way to escape it. Damon, there's something I want to tell you. I'm hungry. That's not what I meant. I want noodles. Another time, I tried again. About what happened between us. I need to take a nap. And once, when I finally gathered enough courage to say, I think we should talk about us, he simply looked at me and said, You already have what you wanted, Adrian. I'm carrying your heir. Isn't that enough? Then he'd change the subject. Every single time. It was as though Damon had built a wall around himself, and whenever I got close to it, he reminded me that carrying my child was already more than enough of a favor. He didn't want anything else from me. At least, that's what he kept telling me. I tried to believe him. But it became harder every day. Then came the day I finally lost my patience. I'd had a terrible day at work. A major business issue had appeared without warning, and I'd spent hours dealing with it. By the time I returned home, I was exhausted, frustrated, and in no mood for another argument. I walked into the living room and found Damon sprawled comfortably across the couch. He was eating while two of his maids stood beside him, massaging his shoulders. The sight would normally have made me laugh. That day, it didn't. Damon glanced at me while taking another bite. You're finally back. Yeah. He continued eating. You know, I've been going through so much because of you while you were having fun. I stopped walking. What? Damon sighed dramatically. This pregnancy hasn't exactly been easy. One of the maids immediately joined in. Mr. Damon has been suffering quite a lot. The other nodded. He really has. We've had to take care of everything for him. I stared at them. Something inside me snapped. Can you all stop? Damon looked up. I took a breath, but my frustration was already spilling out. I've spent every day trying to make things easier for you. I've taken care of you, I've been to every appointment, I've made sure you have everything you need, and I haven't complained once. My voice hardened. But you do nothing except complain about how difficult everything is. The room went completely silent. Damon slowly put his food down. Excuse me? You heard me. His eyes narrowed. I never asked you to do all of that. I know. Then don't throw it in my face. I'm not. You're acting like I owe you something. I never said you owe me anything. Then why are you standing there complaining? Because I'm tired, Damon. So am I. His voice echoed through the room. We stared at each other, both breathing heavily. Then Damon said something that hurt far more than I expected. You think I wanted this? I froze. I agreed to carry your child because I wanted to return the favor, he said bitterly. That's all. My chest tightened. Otherwise, why would a dominant alpha like me ever agree to become pregnant for you? I stared at him. For a moment, I couldn't even find the words to respond. Damon's expression remained angry. Then he pointed toward the door. And don't ever raise your voice at me again. Especially not in my own home. I felt something inside me crack. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply turned around and walked away. Adrian. I kept walking. Behind me, I heard the maids rush after me. Mr. Adrian, please don't leave. Damon didn't mean it. It's the pregnancy hormones. He's just emotional right now. I stopped near the door for a moment. My hand tightened around the handle. Maybe they were right. Maybe Damon hadn't meant every word. Maybe it really was the hormones. But none of that changed how his words had made me feel. I'd spent weeks hoping that there was something between us. I'd convinced myself that the way he looked at me meant something. That the way he'd held me that night meant something. That maybe, someday, he might choose me. And now I couldn't even tell whether any of it had been real. So I opened the door. And left without looking back. After that day, I stayed away from Damon. I didn't call him. I didn't visit the penthouse. I didn't even send him a message. But staying away from him didn't mean I stopped worrying about him. Every morning, I would find myself wondering whether he'd eaten. Whether he'd slept well. Whether the baby was doing okay. I just didn't have the courage to ask him directly. So I contacted one of his maids instead. Did Damon eat breakfast? Is he feeling all right? Did he sleep last night? I asked quietly, almost every day. And whenever she told me that he was doing fine, I would breathe a little easier. I never let Damon know that I was still checking on him. I told myself I was giving him the space he'd wanted. But then his 6-month appointment arrived. I went to the hospital that day. Damon arrived with his mother. The moment I saw him, I knew something wasn't right. His pregnancy was progressing beautifully. His belly had grown considerably, and physically, he looked healthy. But his eyes were different. There was a sadness there that hadn't been there before. I approached him carefully. Damon. He didn't look at me. I swallowed. How are you feeling? Nothing. He simply stared ahead. Damon, can we talk? He turned his face away. His mother, however, looked at me and smiled. Adrian, it's good to see you. I greeted her politely, and she spoke to me normally throughout the appointment. But Damon never once looked at me. Not even when I was standing right beside him. I tried not to let it show, but it hurt. After the appointment, I left without pushing him any further. That evening, my phone rang. It was one of Damon's maids. The same woman who had once been so dramatic about every little thing. But there was nothing dramatic about her voice that evening. She sounded serious. Mr. Adrian, please listen to me. My stomach tightened. What happened? It's Damon. I immediately sat up. He's physically fine, she said quickly. The doctor says the baby is healthy. But that's not the problem. I remained silent. Damon is struggling. My heart sank. Pregnancy hasn't caused him many physical difficulties, but that doesn't mean he's okay. She took a breath. He's struggling mentally. I closed my eyes. He thinks people are judging him. He thinks other alphas are mocking him because he's pregnant. My fingers tightened around my phone. Damon has always been proud, she continued. He's always been the kind of alpha who refuses to show weakness. But now he feels exposed. I couldn't speak. He doesn't know how to express what he's feeling. So instead, he keeps everything inside. Her voice became quieter. He feels like he's going through this alone. I lowered my head. Then she said something that made my heart drop. After you left, he stopped eating properly. What? He barely touched his meals at first. We tried everything, but he kept refusing. She paused. Now he's become even quieter. He doesn't talk much anymore. Most of the time, he stays in his room alone. I felt sick. I had thought I was giving him space. I had thought I was respecting him. But all this time, Damon had been suffering alone. He's carrying your daughter, Mr. Adrian, she said. And he's trying to convince himself that he doesn't need anyone. My throat tightened. Please come back. I didn't answer. I'm asking you to come back. Her voice cracked. He won't ask you himself. He's too stubborn. I knew she was right. Please don't tell him I called you, she added quickly. He'll be furious if he finds out. I won't. And please. She hesitated. Don't leave him alone anymore. The call ended. I sat there staring at my phone. For weeks, I'd been angry. I'd convinced myself that Damon didn't want me around. That he'd been perfectly fine without me. But I'd never stopped to consider what my absence might have looked like from his side. I thought I was giving him freedom. Instead, maybe I'd made him feel abandoned. The thought crushed me. Damon had always been the strongest person in every room. The arrogant alpha who never backed down. The man who would rather suffer in silence than admit he was hurting. And now he was carrying our daughter while struggling with everything he'd never learned how to say. And I'd walked away because my feelings were hurt. I felt like I'd failed him. I covered my face with my hands and took a shaky breath. No more. I couldn't undo the weeks I'd spent away from him. But I could change what happened next. I didn't know whether Damon would forgive me. I didn't know whether he'd even want me back. And I wasn't going to force him to accept my love. But I could be there. I could make sure he never had to face this alone again. For Damon. For our daughter. And perhaps, finally, for the family I'd secretly wanted from the beginning. I stood up. Tomorrow, I was going back to the penthouse. And this time, I wasn't going to leave. The next morning, I went back to the penthouse. I barely had time to knock before the door opened. Damon froze when he saw me. His expression immediately hardened. What are you doing here? I came back. You shouldn't have. He stepped aside, his voice cold. I told you I don't need you, Adrian. I didn't argue. I simply walked toward him and pulled him into my arms. Damon stiffened. For a moment, he didn't move. Then I whispered against his hair. I'm sorry. That was all I said. I didn't try to justify why I'd left. I didn't tell him that I had been hurt or that I thought I was giving him the space he wanted. I just apologized. Slowly, the tension in his body eased. He still didn't hug me back. But he didn't push me away either. That was enough for me. From that day forward, I made sure I was truly there for him. Not just physically. I started talking to him more. I ate meals with him, sat beside him in the evenings, listened to his endless complaints, and asked about the things that bothered him instead of assuming he was fine. At first, Damon remained distant. His answers were short. His conversations ended quickly. Sometimes he would simply sit beside me without saying a word. But little by little, he started opening up again. He began telling me about his day. He started teasing me. He complained when I annoyed him. And eventually, he became comfortable enough to fall asleep beside me again. Sometimes, he'd doze off in my arms in the evening, his head resting against my chest while one of my hands instinctively settled over his growing belly. Those moments were everything to me. I'd sit there quietly, afraid that even the smallest movement might wake him. Damon sleeping peacefully against me. Our daughter growing inside him. For those few hours, it felt like every dream I'd secretly carried for years had somehow come true. Then one day, I asked Damon to accompany me to an event at my company. He had stopped attending public gatherings because he felt uncomfortable being around so many people. You don't have to stay long, I told him. I don't want to go. You should. He gave me an unimpressed look. Why? Because there's nothing for you to be ashamed of. His expression softened slightly. You're carrying our daughter. You should be proud of yourself. Damon looked away. After a long pause, he finally sighed. Fine. I smiled. But we're leaving early. Deal. For the first half of the evening, everything went perfectly. Damon stayed close to me, and I made sure he was comfortable. Then my assistant appeared. She had always been a little too friendly with me. And that night, she seemed determined to prove it. She stood beside me, laughing at everything I said, touching my arm whenever she spoke, and finding one excuse after another to remain close. I didn't encourage her. But I also didn't immediately notice how Damon was watching. His expression slowly changed. The smile disappeared from his face. His jaw tightened. His eyes lingered on my assistant for a moment before moving back to me. A few minutes later, Damon walked over. We're leaving. I blinked. Already? Yes. There was something very sharp in his voice. I didn't argue. During the drive home, he barely spoke. He sat beside me with his arms crossed, staring out the window. I knew exactly what was bothering him. And, despite myself, I couldn't help enjoying it. Damon could deny his feelings all he wanted. But the jealous expression he'd worn at the event had been almost impossible to miss. For someone who insisted he felt nothing for me, he certainly hadn't looked indifferent. Still, I didn't tease him. Not yet. The moment we reached the penthouse, however, Damon grabbed my hand. Damon? He didn't answer. He pulled me inside, one hand holding mine while his other rested protectively over his belly. Then he led me straight toward the bathroom. I stared at him. What's happening? Go wash yourself. I blinked. What? I said, wash yourself. A smile slowly spread across my face. Why? His eyes narrowed. I saw you enjoying your assistant hanging all over you. There it was. I almost laughed. Damon. Don't. You're jealous. I am not. Then why are you ordering me to wash off her scent? His expression darkened. Because I don't want you smelling like her in my home. I couldn't stop smiling. Damon, I thought what we have wasn't supposed to be more than a pregnancy arrangement. He went quiet. I stepped closer. Before he could say anything, I walked into the shower fully dressed. Adrian. I reached out, caught his hand, and gently pulled him inside with me. He stared at me in disbelief. Then I wrapped my arms around him and kissed him. For a moment, he simply stood there. He didn't kiss me back. But he didn't push me away either. I held him tighter. "I've been waiting for this," I whispered. Damon finally pulled back. His face was flushed, and his expression was guarded. I wasn't jealous. I smiled. Of course. I wasn't. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." He glared at me. I laughed softly. Damon could deny it all he wanted. But I had seen the way his expression changed when my assistant touched me. I'd heard the irritation in his voice. I'd felt the way he'd grabbed my hand the moment we got home. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the truth. Damon wasn't indifferent. He was simply terrified of admitting what he felt. And for the first time, I wasn't going to force him to say it. I could wait. Because now I knew there was something worth waiting for. After that night, something between Damon and me quietly changed. Neither of us talked about it. We didn't need to. We simply became more comfortable around each other. Damon started sitting closer to me. He'd steal my food without asking, complain whenever I worked too late, and occasionally reach for my hand without even realizing he was doing it. But my favorite change happened at night. Damon started falling asleep in my arms. At first, it happened by accident. One evening, we were watching television when his head slowly found its way onto my shoulder. I thought he was simply tired, but a few minutes later, I realized he was completely asleep. After that, it became a habit. He'd curl against me, bury his face into the side of my neck, and mumble sleepily, "Rub my back." I'd smile and do exactly what he asked. Sometimes, just before falling asleep, he'd talk about our daughter. "I wonder what she'll look like. I can't wait to meet her. Do you think she'll have your eyes?" I'd listen quietly, running my fingers through his hair while he slowly drifted off. Those nights gave me a kind of peace I'd never known before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about business, competition, or winning. I was simply happy. And perhaps that's why I became careless. One evening, Damon and I were sitting together, arguing over something completely ridiculous. "You're impossible," he muttered. "You've known that for years. And somehow, I still have to deal with you. You say that like you're suffering." "I am." I laughed. Then, wanting to annoy him, I leaned back and said, "Fine. I'll just go spend time with my assistant. She actually appreciates me." I expected him to roll his eyes. Instead, Damon went quiet. The smile disappeared from his face. I immediately realized I'd touched a nerve. "Damon. Don't." His voice was different. I turned toward him. I was joking. I know. But he wouldn't look at me. I watched him for a moment before asking softly, "Are you upset because of what I said?" "No." "Then look at me." He didn't. I reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. "Just leave it, Adrian." There was something behind his voice that I couldn't understand. I moved closer. "Damon, talk to me." "I don't want to." "Why?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were already wet. I froze. "Damon." He quickly wiped his face. "Don't look at me." I'd never seen him like that. Not the arrogant alpha who always had an answer. Not my rival who could argue with me for hours without backing down. Just Damon. Vulnerable and hurting. I immediately pulled him into my arms. He resisted. "Let me go." "No. Adrian. I was only teasing you." He remained silent. "I would never leave you for my assistant." Still nothing. I held him more tightly. "I wouldn't leave you for anyone." His breathing trembled. "Then why do you keep joking about it?" I went quiet. Because suddenly, I understood. Damon wasn't angry about my assistant. He was afraid. Afraid that one day I'd realize I didn't really need him. Afraid that everything between us could disappear as easily as it had begun. I gently lifted his face. "Damon, look at me." He finally did. "I need you to understand something." I took a breath. "I don't want my assistant. I don't want anyone else." His eyes searched mine. "Then what do you want?" The question came out so quietly that it almost broke my heart. "You." His expression changed. I continued before I could lose my courage. "I've wanted you for a very long time." Damon stared at me. "How long?" I smiled sadly. "Since I was 15. He looked stunned. "You're lying." "I'm not." I let out a quiet laugh. "I've loved you for years, Damon. I just never knew how to say it." His eyes filled with fresh tears. "I thought you hated me. I thought you hated me. I was always mean to you." "I know. You fought with me constantly. You made it very easy." A small laugh escaped him. I smiled. But I noticed you long before we became rivals. I noticed everything about you." He looked down. "Then why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because you were Damon Blackwood." I brushed my thumb gently across his cheek. "You were the one person I couldn't afford to fall for. Our families hated each other. We were always competing. And I was terrified that if I told you how I felt, I'd lose whatever place I had in your life." Damon was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, "You really love me?" I nodded. "With everything I have." He stared at me as though he was trying to decide whether he could believe me. Then he suddenly wrapped his arms around me. "I love you too." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. "You do?" He nodded against my chest. "I've loved you for years too." I held him tighter. "I was mean to you because I didn't know what else to do. Every time you beat me, I hated how proud I was of you. Every time you smiled at someone else, I hated how much it bothered me." I laughed softly through my tears. "So all those arguments were because I was an idiot." I smiled. "Apparently, so was I." Damon pulled back slightly. "And I'm sorry." "For what?" "For the things I said after I became pregnant." My smile faded. "I shouldn't have told you that I only agreed to carry your child because I wanted to repay you." His hand slowly moved over his belly. "I said it because I was scared." He looked into my eyes. "I didn't want you to think I was falling for you." My heart tightened. But I was. I reached for his hand. "You don't have to apologize anymore." "I still want to." He gave me a small smile. "I don't regret our daughter, Adrian." I looked at his belly. "I love her already." My eyes burned. "And I don't regret carrying your child either." That was what finally broke me. I pulled him into my arms, and this time, neither of us tried to hide our tears. We stayed like that for a long time. Years of rivalry. Years of pretending. Years of loving each other from opposite sides of a family feud. All of it seemed so far away. I kissed his forehead. Then his cheeks. His temples. His nose. Damon laughed softly through his tears. "Adrian, I've waited years to do this. To kiss me. To love you openly." He rested his forehead against mine. "I love you." I smiled. "I love you too." I pulled him back into my arms. "I promise I won't leave you." "You better not. And I'll stop using my assistant to make you jealous." "You should." I laughed. "And I promise I'll try not to annoy you." Damon narrowed his eyes. "Try?" I grinned. "I can't promise miracles." He hit my chest lightly. And this time, there was no anger behind it. Only love. Later that night, Damon fell asleep in my arms again, his face tucked against my neck and his hand resting over our daughter. I lay there quietly, holding them both. For years, I'd thought my greatest victory would be defeating Damon Blackwood. But I finally understood how wrong I'd been. My greatest victory wasn't winning against him. It was finally having him choose me. And this time, I had no intention of ever letting him feel alone again. After that night, something in our relationship finally settled into place. The last bit of hesitation between Damon and me disappeared. We no longer had to wonder what the other person was thinking or pretend that our feelings didn't exist. We were simply together, and for the first time, being with Damon felt easy. If anything, Damon became even more attached to me. He'd look for me whenever I wasn't around, complain if I worked too late, and somehow always find a reason to sit beside me. At night, he would curl against me without hesitation, sometimes falling asleep with his arms wrapped around me and his face tucked against my neck. I never complained. I loved being needed by him. I also noticed that Damon seemed to eat more whenever he was happy. During the difficult period between us, he'd barely touched his food. But once we were happy again, his appetite returned with a vengeance. I'd watch him finish his meal and then start eyeing whatever was left on my plate. "You want that too?" "No." A few seconds later, his fork would mysteriously appear on my plate. Eventually, I stopped teasing him. I'd simply feed him myself. One bite of food. Then a kiss. Another bite. Another kiss. Damon would pretend to be annoyed. "You're treating me like a child. And you're eating like one." He'd glare at me before opening his mouth for the next bite. I knew he secretly loved it. Then, before we knew it, the day we'd been waiting for finally arrived. Our daughter was born. The moment I held her for the first time, I couldn't stop staring. She was tiny, beautiful, and surprisingly strong. And apparently, she'd inherited one very important trait from her father. Her appetite. Our daughter seemed to believe that being born meant having unlimited access to food. She wanted milk constantly. Damon barely had time to rest before she was hungry again. "She just ate," he'd complain exhaustedly. "She wants more. She always wants more." I'd laugh while taking our daughter from him and watching Damon collapse against the pillows. But even when he was exhausted, I could see how happy he was. He'd look at our daughter with the softest expression, and every time I saw it, my heart filled a little more. She had brought something into our lives that neither of us could have imagined. After she was born, I officially moved into Damon's penthouse. There was no point pretending it was temporary anymore. That was my home. Damon was there. Our daughter was there. My entire life was there. And something else changed along with it. Our families finally stopped fighting. For generations, the Blackwoods and my family had treated each other like enemies. But somehow, our daughter became the reason that old rivalry finally ended. The people who had once spent years trying to outdo each other were suddenly sitting at the same table, arguing over who got to hold their granddaughter first. It was almost funny. Damon and I had spent our entire lives competing. And somehow, we were the ones who finally brought our families together. As our daughter grew, Damon and I started talking about marriage. I wanted to marry him. Not because we had a child. Not because our families expected it. I wanted to marry him because I loved him. Damon wanted it too. He just wasn't quite ready. One evening, I found him standing in front of the mirror, staring at himself with a frown. I've gained so much weight. I walked up behind him. You're still the most attractive man in the world. He gave me a skeptical look through the mirror. You're obviously biased. Completely. He sighed. I don't look like I used to. I wrapped my arms around him. You don't have to. He looked at me. I loved you before you carried our daughter. I loved you while you were carrying her. And I'll love you at every weight, every age, and every stage of your life. His expression softened. You really mean that? I kissed his cheek. Every word. He smiled. Then maybe I'll marry you someday. Someday? Don't rush me. I laughed. Fine. I'll wait. And I would. Because after everything we'd been through, I knew there was no need to hurry. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie beside Damon and watch him sleep. Our daughter would be sleeping nearby, safe and peaceful. And I'd think about the 15-year-old version of myself who had first fallen for Damon without even understanding what those feelings meant. Back then, I never could have imagined that the boy who had caught my attention at boarding school would one day become the man sleeping beside me. My rival. My first love. The father of my daughter. My home. I'd once asked the moon goddess for the strongest Enigma heir I could possibly have. But looking at my family now, I realized I'd been asking for something far too small. She hadn't just given me an heir. She had given me a daughter who filled our home with laughter. She had given me a man I had loved since I was 15. And she had given me a family I never thought I'd have. For all the battles Damon and I had fought, all the years we'd spent pretending we couldn't stand each other, and all the time we'd wasted hiding what was in our hearts. It had somehow led us here. And every night, before I closed my eyes, I thanked the goddess for it. Because I had everything I'd once thought I could never have. Damon in my arms. Our daughter sleeping nearby. And a lifetime ahead of us. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wishing for anything more. I was simply grateful. I had my family. And I had the man I'd loved since I was 15. My greatest rival. My greatest love. My forever.